Behold, the reason why McFarlane should have made more female figures, and probably why you clicked on this video. And sadly, not a moment too late, because now with the recent news that McFarlane seemingly and allegedly may be losing the license halfway through 2026, we're really looking back at the potential of what it would have been like if McFarlane shouldn't have really predicated on the whole, well, female characters don't sell, because Exhibit A, one of the figures that sold out within minutes from virtually every fan channel and online retailer possible. Amazon, Big Bad Toy Store, Entertainment Earth, obviously the McFarlane Toy Store. Even GameStop to a certain extent, even though I think that one came back regularly into... I'm so flabbergasted that my voice even cracked there. And then you could practically forget about finding her in store, because once somebody would finally find it in some kind of brick and mortar shelf, specifically when it started to drop just a handful of days after the pre-orders launched, some would allegedly presume on the earlier side, maybe somebody broke Street Day, one of the employees put them out by accident, and thus it was kind of making us realize whether or not it was actually a safe bet to pre-order if they're already going to be found in stores. Now with the whole debacle about what's happening to the DC license, swapping hands, it looks like maybe the one that managed to kind of get out there before everything kind of drew out to a close in a very distinct but also very classic and very definitive fashion would have to be some form of proper DC Multiverse 7-inch Powergirl. And obviously you can see that this was a figure that I needed to at least make the efforts in procuring for various reasons, but one of them being that she's more or less kind of based on one of the more quintessential bucks and builds for one of the more definitive characters of the Justice League of DC, hell, of the original Trinity, Wonder Woman. And so I wanted to really kind of pick apart exactly how much she's lifting from the Wonder Woman build, and at the same time kind of bringing her own unique assets to the table. How many times am I going to do this? And obviously Power Girl needs no introduction from a visual standpoint. She's got the white suit there that is pretty much really emphasizing what she's known for. But in case you didn't know, this is pretty much Kara, but not when she's Supergirl. She's from an alternative version, Krypton 2 to be specific, and therefore it was kind of like a chance encounter that she then kind of takes on the moniker of Power Girl as opposed to Supergirl. And so for the most part, you can see that they retrofitted her to have the classic suit along with the golden shield guard right here on the shoulder that then has the strap all the way across. And this is probably the figure that could be utilized as an example as to, you know, one of the arguments that can be made in favor of McFarlane is that they opted to at least have something like this up on the shelf. And what can you really say that about some other companies? The fact that they went for a classic Power Girl aesthetic, a Power Girl look without compromising anything. And that's pretty much what you got going for right here. You got, of course, the white suit, the red utility belt, along with the blue gloves, the boots, down to even the cape, which even is a full-on cloth cape, which with one of the more stronger wirings around the rim of both sides here at the top as well as the bottom that is very rigid and very firm, and is pretty much capable of holding any kind of position or look that you see fit. Albeit, it still kind of strikes me as a little odd that the only capes that really have this form of rigidness to the wiring inside the cape itself would have to be any that are managed to compromise in terms of length. So if your character is going to have a very short cape, a la Robin, Power Girl, Supergirl, or even some iterations of Superman, if he's got a shorter cape, he's going to be able to have some of the much stronger wiring. So a little bit of a bummer that characters like Batman, when they do have the wiring, they often opt in for the nylon fabric. But it's good to see that at least Power Girl right here has got the much more quality cape. I just wish that it was a little bit more quality when being kind of fit and plugged into the figure itself, because I'm not the biggest fan of this shoulder piece right here where you can kind of see the cape kind of protruding from the outside here, and it looks like it kind of makes the whole assembly look a little cheap. I don't know what it is. For a moment, I even thought that maybe I got a defect figure and it was kind of coming apart, but once I investigated a little bit further, it just looks like that's the way that it was kind of tooled and assembled together. So I wish that that had some better optics to it. But while we're here at the top, we have, of course, some very obvious things to look at. The head sculpt, of course, it's beautifully painted, sculpted with the blonde hair right there that is, of course, donning the much shorter cut. But I'm also pretty happy that overall it's a very quality head sculpt that feels very distinct to Powergirl. And I have to mention how distinct it is once we get to a very specific comparison later down the line. But as far as proportions and overall sculpt, I do have some criticisms. Sure, we have the areas of Power Girl here that are very pleasing to the eye, specifically the thickness around the thighs, the actual skin tone that they managed to apply. But then I will admit that maybe we could have at least balanced things out when it came to the arms and even a little bit of the feet slash boots, because I do feel like they're a little bit on the small side. They do feel a little bit on the scrawny as far as comparisons. If they were kind of like just by themselves, I would probably say that they don't look too bad. But once you kind of compare it to the much, like I said, larger assets, then that's really where I do feel like maybe we could have added just a little bit of mass, a little bit of musculature to, again, kind of feed into the whole Power Girl persona. But as you can kind of tell right here, that, yeah, this is the ultimate jar figure. But when we're not glazing, we do have to kind of call out a few of the qualms that I do have with the figure, which, again, like I already mentioned, some of the proportioning around certain aspects about the figure. Even when it comes to areas that, yes, you would think I would be perving out, I do think that it's a little strange that you have a flesh-colored kind of gap right there, and maybe they could have darkened it with maybe like some black paint applications to just, again, kind of fill that in so it doesn't look so awkward. But when we're not being inappropriate, I do think that a little bit of quality control could have been spared, because mine did come with a little bit of a QC issue around one of the boots, right about right there. It's kind of like this little graft. And I think I do want to take this time to kind of ask you guys to post down in the comments if you guys have any kind of solutions to make sure that this doesn't really happen or doesn't continue. Specifically in a way where I can maybe buff it out or scrape it off, because I tried to take a little bit of a very sharp blade or a knife and try to scrape it off, because it kind of looks like it's a piece of paper or something grafted onto the boot itself. But whenever I try to do that, sure enough, it starts scraping into the plastic and actually removing pieces of the boot itself. So if you guys have any kind of recommendations for a solution, I would appreciate it. But on the bright side, that little defect could be found on the inside of the boot as opposed to the outside, so it's kind of away from view. And if you want to mask the view even further, you could technically move the boot about via the articulation, which for the most part is helped out by how I guess you could say exposed certain areas of the figure are, and that does kind of lend a little bit to the pretty good articulation. The head is able to freely move 360 degrees and is able to tilt in practically every kind of direction very feasibly, so up and down and even side to side. I would imagine that maybe a shorter haircut does allow that to happen even more easily. And then the arms are fully able to rotate vertically 360 degrees as well as extend off to the side. Albeit, I do think that maybe you'll find a little bit of hindrance with the actually, no, I kind of take it back. They managed to find a way to kind of fit the golden shoulder guard and the strap around to where it's not really glued onto the body itself, but because of how boisterous she is with her proportions, it's almost like all of this is just kind of locking it into place. So, kind of a blessing in disguise, so to speak. Right below that, though, you do find the bicep swivels that are able to rotate 360 degrees, no problem. Two joints at the knees that are fully capable of bending all the way up and are very flexible, though that's due in part to the fact that the arms are a little bit on the narrower side than I would have liked. But at least right below that, you do have a wrist joint that fully allows the hand to rotate 360 as well as bend inwards and outwards, no problem. I do kind of wish that maybe we would have had a little bit of a mid-torso cut, specifically right below the reasons for why you clicked on this video, like I mentioned before, as well as a waist articulation that is fully able to rotate 360 degrees in place, as well as being able to crunch inwards, outwards, side to side, no problem. I just wish that we could have had a little bit of an extra joint right about right there. And there's a secondary reason as to why, but before I cover that, let me get to that point. In order to do so, let's cover the legs. They're able to fully bend almost all the way up, actually, due to the way that this diaper is kind of cut across and exposing, like I said, quite a bit of the leg plastic. You're able to flex the legs probably I just went full Beavis from Beavis and Butthead there, but she is able to flex probably the highest of any top leg joints that I've ever covered on the channel. Jesus Christ, wow, that is remarkable, and is able to almost bend all the way backwards like so. That is astounding. and you could pretty much expect a full 180-degree split on the leg extension off to the sides, so no complaints found whatsoever right there. Two joints that are fully able to bend at the knee all the way up, and then of course we got a very flex ankle joint that flushes with the rest of the boot, is able to kind of fit perfectly in place and not kind of stand out, allowing the foot to fully rotate 360 degrees as well as pivot upwards and downwards, inwards and outwards on the bottom part of the joint. However, this is what I was kind of foreshadowing earlier before. Usually here is where I get to the toesies. However, they are not found. There are no toesies on Powergirl whatsoever. Very similar to some other female characters that have kind of garnered this sort of boot design. There's no toe articulation on Powergirl here. So that's two joints missing, and then that kind of made me, when I was playing with the figure prior to the review, that reminded me about how there's only technically one joint at the torso via the waist, nowhere to be found on the mid-torso cut. So we're actually missing three joints, and upon counting all of the joints together, we're really only holding on to about maybe 19 or 20, if I'm not mistaken, 20 joints of articulation. Completely not the 22 that is labeled at the top of the box. So I can't really defend the slightly misleading information that is presented on the box. This does not have 22 points of articulation. So yeah, I feel like for the first time in a really long time, a McFarlane figure was trying, or at least a DC Multiverse figure, was trying to pull the wool over our eyes via very distracting details, only for me to say, nay, back away, woman. I have the power of God and the internet on my side, and I'm able to see the figure for what it is, lacking the necessary points of articulation. So generally, for any other figure, to be fair across the board, it's here where I would say, well, if we're missing joints of articulation, then what are the accessories going to be able to present us to make up for that? Well, sadly, I don't think they're really made up in that department either. She comes with two extra set of hand accessories, and they are practically the more generic version of hand accessories. You got, of course, the fists, and then two semi-triggering, semi-holding hands, except she's not really known for holding any extra weapons or items or anything that they could have dropped in for what is technically a collector's edition. And generally, the rule of thumb is that collector's edition figures for the DC Multiverse line need to have a little bit of added bonuses, added things beyond just the display stand, the base, the card, and of course the collectible packaging. And we've seen various iterations of collector's editions that have accessories up the ass, and within this wave they did a pretty adequate job, specifically with the Guy Gardner with the added hair and the face sculpts, and then with Captain Cold and the added faces that you're able to swap out, as well as the gun, etc. And with Powergirl here, sure, it's kind of quirky that I was able to note that the default hands she comes with are the extending, showing off hands that she's got right there on her person. And I feel like there's a reason why, because there's a very specific pose that you could put her on right out of the box. And I feel like they might have done that on purpose. So beyond the hands, what else does she come with? Stinky the cat. Yes, her pet cat from the comics. And sure, she's adorable. She's got the Superman cape right there, or the Kryptonian cape if you want to get very specific, along with the little lightning bolt decal there on her side. And once you kind of scan over the little details, you'll notice that, yeah, she's sculpted pretty adequately, but she's also a very static, solid piece. So no form of articulation. This is pretty much how you see her and how she's going to be. And she's able to stand on her own pretty finely, except it's not like the greatest accessory that I would have liked for Powergirl. And if you want to get super nitpicky, Stinky the cat here, she's got a few very obvious plastic seams where you can kind of see a little bit of the assembly on the piece. One of her eyes, I think if you look a little carefully, is a little misaligned as far as being applied onto the head itself. Though I do really like the fact that not only is the cape cloth, but it's also held together by a very adorable buckle there on the front. Apart from that, yeah, the overall package here, I feel like it's one of those areas where McFarlane knew that people were going to buy this ASAP, and they kind of maybe cut some corners on the accessory front because of that. And sadly, once the novelty of owning a very, very accurate Power Girl kind of wears off, you kind of get that clarity, that post blank clarity. I'm trying to keep this as PG as possible, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Once you've done the deed, you kind of get this cleansing of the mind that finally lets you see straight and go, wait a minute, maybe I was bamboozled here. And the thing is that you technically have already gotten this figure before, and so getting this figure again in the form of a Power Girl aesthetic, it really only befits you if you did, in fact, manage to be a fan of Power Girl. Here you have, of course, a figure that everybody was comparing it to, the collector's edition Wonder Woman. And for the most part, yes, you do see very, very strong similarities to the point where they full-on pulled pretty much all of her limbs directly from the Wonder Woman, as far as the slight thinness to the arms and the biceps that I do feel like they could have maybe added a little bit to the clothy nature of the suit over here with Power Girl. You can see that they pretty much just lifted the arms, the legs, the thighs, the biceps, even down to the hand accessories. They're pretty much identical. And to a certain extent, even the torso is as well, to the point where even Diana was missing a little bit of that mid-torso cut. So you could see that they simply just kind of retooled it, removed a little bit of the armor, exposed a little bit of the bosom, very trademark Power Girl. But apart from that, they just kind of retrofitted everything to make sure that it looked like the classic Power Girl outfit. And at least on the bright side, one of the concerns that I had was that they were simply just going to take her head sculpt, give her the blonde wig, and just call it at that. But thankfully, it does look like they kind of overhauled the head sculpt a little bit. Maybe the eyes and the cheekbones is kind of the same, but they did kind of cone and thin out the bottom part of her jaw to look a little bit more Power Girl-like, so it looks like maybe there's some distinct qualities to the head sculpt, so they were able to kind of overhaul that. And of course, the most obvious distinction with Diana over here was that she was a collector's edition entry worthy of the name, along with a shield, a sword, an axe, plenty of hand accessories, the lasso, just so much packed into that $30 package that made it worth it. And frankly, I can't really say that too badly about Power Girl once you're able to kind of move past the similarities to the Wonder Woman that you may or may already have in the collection. In fact, I will go as far as to say that if you were to get a Power Girl, it probably should be the Platinum variant, which I was lucky enough to have gotten via GameStop. GameStop, along with Entertainment Earth and a couple of other outlets, I think even Amazon at one point was opting to include some Chase variants into some of their orders. Of course, not every single storefront is going to be able to achieve this, but I was able to pull a very lucky draw from GameStop. When I cracked that box open and I saw the Platinum sticker, I was like, oh wow, this hardly ever happens, and I'm not passing up the opportunity to own a Platinum Chase of Power Girl. So you can see right here that this is the variant. Albeit it's the same sculpt, but of course you'll notice that the major difference is that the blue on the gloves and the boots are a little bit on the darker side. And then of course she's got a much more leotard-like suit that covers up the more fleshy bits, albeit except for, of course, the very attractive cutout here on the chest. But then the most obvious distinctions here would have to be a pleathery actual jacket that's fit along the arms and the shoulders of the actual figure itself, along with a different head sculpt that is for the most part the same, except this time she's got the laser eyes. And speaking of laser eyes, I think it's pretty adorable that they also included the laser eyes on Stinky over here. He's got the eyes as well, so that's pretty adorable. Apart from that, she's the exact same figure as far as accessories with the bonus hands, the overall sculpting and the detail, and even the articulation. Though, the articulation will of course be a little bit hindered around the arms and the shoulders because of the jacket itself. But frankly, if you already have the original, I would say that the Platinum is worthy of that sacrifice on articulation, because I really do dig the applications to the jacket itself, as far as the look, as far as the textured feel, the stitching, the actual fitting across the shoulders. That actually makes sense for the character to have this sort of jacket, and even a few of the S symbol emblem stitchings embroidered onto the jacket itself. I think it's a very, very fine touch. And even on top of that, they managed to still include the guard right on top of it. So overall, it just adds this quality, this premium feel to the Chase figure that I think is able to bring it much higher to being worth that $30 collector's edition price tag than the basic Power Girl. Now granted, I know that this is the definitive look, But in terms of quality and in terms of being a better figure, I would argue that maybe the Chase is more worthy of that title. And then on top of that, having owned both, this gives me the option to do, of course, a proper head swap. So should I want the laser eyes on the default Power Girl to kind of highlight those powers, I can do so as well. Now, if you were to be kind of walking down the aisle and get a chance at both of these figures, if you happen to have the money, pick both of them up. But if you can only pick up one, you really need to ask yourself, how badly do you want a definitive classic-looking Power Girl? Do you already have the Wonder Woman figure from the collector's edition release a few months back? If that's the case, and Power Girl doesn't speak to you as highly as Diana did, then this is not necessarily as great of a release as it is out there. Now, granted, we're also dudes. We're going to be, kind of taken with certain details about Power Girl at the end of the day. But when it comes to the objective take on this figure, I would say that it's a 7 out of 10. It's a pretty solid addition to the collector's edition wave, but it's not necessarily one of their finer releases as far as value proposition. I would feel that the Chase variant is able to do that a bit more effectively because of the jacket and the very personality-driven quirk of the laser eyes. And if I were to give it a separate rating, I would say that this one takes it another notch above to an 8 out of 10 for the Platinum Chase Power Girl variant. That is obviously a little harder to come by. So if you do manage to find it in some kind of Walmart or a Target, and you happen to have the expendable income, do not pass up on the Chase. Maybe the default one, will be a bit more readily available when she's able to kind of release in much broader batches. I believe McFarlane themselves put out a statement saying that they're going to be releasing more Power Girls later down the line in stores. So hopefully she'll be much more readily available. And I'm hoping for that even 5 times fold now due to the recent news involving the DC license heading on over back to Mattel. And I'm hoping for many of you who have yet to acquire your own Power Girl that you managed to get her should you really want her that badly in some capacity prior to things getting just a little bit dour with the DC Multiverse line, since it is becoming a bit more of a somber note as we're kind of taking in these news. And I'm also hoping that witnessing just how quickly and how high of a demand there is for Power Girl, whether it's the original or the Chase variant, will speak volumes to McFarlane that should this be the last year and some months of the DC Multiverse wave before things head over to Mattel, that maybe he'll finally put those, business acumen and those spreadsheets and those stats off to the side and finally look at female characters with a proper lens. Give us a very definitive Zatanna. Give us another iteration of Wonder Woman. Maybe one that's much more readily available and is not necessarily as high priced as a collector's edition. Maybe absolute Wonder Woman from the recent comics. And of course, there's various other female characters that I'm kind of blanking on right now. So if you guys have any kind of wish list female characters that you want McFarlane to dish out before things are finally brought to a close, let them be known down below. I'm looking forward to seeing and reading what you guys have to say. And while you guys are down there, hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. And trust me, if you enjoyed it as much as I did filming it, then be sure to just spam that thumbs up button. Spam it, all right? Repeatedly, click the mouse like we've all kind of done at one point or another involving Power Girl. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. And if by some chance you did not enjoy this video, hit the thumbs down button. And as always, stay humble, and I'll catch you guys later.